Hey everyone, welcome back. So with Paxton's first birthday coming up, we figured we would share kind of his birth story since we haven't shared that with you guys yet. So I guess I'll start from the beginning. So when we knew that we had an embryo and when everything was set, when we were going to transfer him, I calculated to see, approximately when his due date would be. And whenever I saw that it was April, so his due date was April 28th, in my head, so for those of us who know us or have been watching our things, we had a second trimester loss, our first pregnancy, and that baby was due April 15th. And so whenever I saw that, the following year that we had another baby due in April, in my head I just said it's coming April 15th. There's no other way. Like he's coming on April 15th. And then that's kind of where we both were, at least. I don't know. Did you think that?
No, Natalie's just nuts, and I mean, she turned out to be basically right. So it was like April 15th at like 11 p.m. No, I guess it was about 10. It was a little before 11. It was probably about 10:45-ish, I think. I was still out on the couch. Natalie always goes to bed really, really early. At least she used to anyway. And she had gone to bed, I don't know, like 8 p.m. or something like that. And I heard a noise basically right as I was about to get up and come to bed. And then I kind of stopped and I thought it was background noise, and then it turned out to be her yelling for me. But this wasn't abnormal. She always yells for me while she's laying in bed. She's like too lazy to get up and come and get me. So she's yelling. I came in and she's like, I think my water broke.
So it was weird because I always, like clockwork, woke up around the same time to go to the bathroom. And so I woke up and I don't know, it felt like a bubble down there. And I remember I put my hand down there and then I was like, oh my gosh, like it's wet. So I called for Ari and then Ari came in and then I asked him to look to see if my water broke, and he's like, I don't know. He's like, well, do you have to pee? Maybe you peed yourself. So I kind of like sprinted to the bathroom, peed, and then obviously I was still leaking afterwards. So then we knew, it was my water.
But the bed was completely dry.
Yeah.
She just must have woken up at the perfect time to stand up and just,
waddle to the bathroom.
And make everything else wet. It's like soaked everywhere.
But yeah, so since I kind of always thought that, baby was coming on April 15th, we sort of were packed, even though then you realize all the last minute things that you're like, oh, this will take a second to throw in the bag, ended up, taking longer, running around, kind of scrambling for, the final things that you're grabbing. And yeah, so I don't know how long it took us till we actually left.
We ended up out of the house around 11:20, so I think it was roughly like a 35-minute period of time between her waking up and realizing and us getting out of the house. So we got in the car, we called the on-call, let them know that we were coming to the hospital, because again, obviously, this wasn't really in like the middle of the pandemic, but this is when kind of everything started to get locked down. Mm-hmm. So we called them to let them know we were on our way. Basically, they ran through some of the stuff. We got to the hospital. But we didn't have, at that point, we really weren't going anywhere. Mm-hmm. And my travel had kind of been cut off. So we were just at home. We didn't even have masks at the time. Mm-hmm. So
these were our masks.
This is what we walked in. We looked like the Bloods and the Crips. One of us had one on and one of us had the other one on. But
so we were kind of laughing at this point because, I was wearing like sweatpants, had this tied around, and then obviously he did too, and then I had like a pee pad between my legs because I was obviously still leaking fluid and just waddling into the bathroom. And Ari made the joke. He was like, looks like we're like trying to, what'd you say? Like rob the hospital, because under normal circumstances, you don't really show up anywhere with, a bandana tied around.
Or if you do, you get arrested.
Yeah.
So.
And then, at that time, luckily he was able to be at the delivery, so they just took our temperature, asked us some questions, and then sent us up to the room, and then we got checked in and then that was when they had me undressed and put on the hospital gown. And it was at that point, because before my fluid, was nice and clear, and which is good, because otherwise I would have panicked. But then when we got there, I remember I peeked out of the door as I was changing. I was like, oh my god, I see blood, and they were like, that's normal. You'll see a lot of it.
But at this point, she hadn't had any noticeable contractions,
No.
nothing. It was just her water broke. Got to the hospital, and then they were like, oh yeah, see this on the screen once they had her hooked up.
Yeah, they were in
See the contractions. Do you feel that? She's like, feel what? I don't feel anything.
But I guess we should say, so it was either 2 weeks or 3 weeks prior was when I first got checked to see if I was dilated or anything, and I was 80% effaced at that point, so I thought, oh, maybe it will happen even sooner. But then I wasn't dilated much, and then I was only about a centimeter, I think, when we got to the hospital. But then it went fast. It was like after we got to the hospital and my water broke, well, obviously my water broke before we got to the hospital. Then I remember, so I guess when she was hooking me up and asking me if I could feel the contractions, I remember I told RA too, because if anyone else, if you follow us, you know that no one knew about this pregnancy, and we didn't want anyone, so we have this little tracker thing on our phones, and so we didn't want my mom to see that we're in the hospital, because obviously then she'd ask, and that's kind of hard to be like, oh well, we're just hanging out here.
So people are probably wondering, why in the world do we have that? But I mean, I think we got that whenever your mom was living with us. Right?
Yeah.
So when they sold their house, and they were in between selling the house and finding a new house, we ended up with this thing, more or less to make sure she didn't get lost, I think.
Yeah. But yeah, so we just we turned that off, the little tracker thing off, so that no one would know we were in there.
For a long period of time.
Yeah. And then, yeah, they checked us in, and then we made our way to the labor room. And then, then they took us into the labor and delivery room, where we went through lots of different nurses. I know, obviously with our history, we were both super paranoid and kept asking tons of questions, and I know the first nurse was a little bit annoyed with us.
But that was at the end of her shift.
Yeah.
So we ended up, how many nurses total?
3?
I think we had 3 total nurses, but we'll get to all.
Yeah. So the first one we only had for, I don't know, half an hour, maybe an hour. And we were not really a fan. I feel like she was just very dismissive of, our concerns.
She just had no patience.
Yeah, and I think she didn't read our chart either, so she thought we were just, I don't know. And then the second nurse kind of didn't spend any time with us. She was never really in the room with us. And I know a bunch of times the baby would move, so we wouldn't hear, the baby's heartbeat anymore. For us, obviously that was a huge concern, so we'd always press, the call button and be like, hey, we can't hear the heartbeat. Can you send someone in here? The baby must have moved. And that nurse was a little bit annoyed with us. And then, then I started to really feel the contractions. And then was it with that one when I threw up? I think it was with that nurse.
Yeah, it was with the second nurse.
So I was getting up to go to the bathroom, and then I was having a contraction. It was just so much pain that I threw up. And then after that, if anyone knows me, they know how much I hate throwing up. Well, I don't think
everybody hates throwing up.
Well, I don't think anyone does, but I really hate it. Just the thought of it.
I think everybody really hates throwing up. Nobody's like, yeah. I think I can go a day. Yeah, today will be the day I'll throw up. Nobody does that.
But anyway, so I threw up, and it was like, okay, I can't move anymore. So at that point, I'm like, screw it, I'm not going to the bathroom anymore. And then.
So at that point, it was a long time, right? Because we had gotten there, we got to the hospital. I almost just said L'Hôpital, which is clearly not English. I can't speak any other languages.
So
but
I think it was midnight.
It was 11:40. We got to the hospital, and by the time she started to contract heavily, it was 6 a.m., 6 a.m.-ish.
Mm-hmm.
And it just stayed the same. It ramped up, and then never ramped up more. but we kept asking. So finally, because there was a
Well,
shift
'cause-
change with the doctors,
Yeah,
and finally we were like, can somebody please check and see
where I was.
how dilated she was, because nobody was really
Checking.
we didn't know. I mean, for all we knew, like, baby could have been crowning and she just wouldn't have known. But at this point she had no medication because she was super concerned about it, and then there was a shift change, and the one doctor that we did know, but it wasn't her choice doctor, came in, checked, and he was basically like, yep, it'll be soon.
Yeah.
He's an older guy. It'll be soon. And then he just kind of like walked out of the room. And we're like, well, what is that? We don't know what that means. What does that mean? But she was like, that was when you started to struggle quite a bit.
Well, and at that point, I feel like at the beginning he was kind of like, oh, we'll just take the medicine. And at that point, he was the one who wasn't really, encouraging or like, saying, oh yeah, you can do it, try it without. Because he had just switched, so he hadn't really seen me. And he was kind of like, well, you might want to consider taking the medicine considering what time you came in, because you had 0 sleep and, it's going to be a while.
And she to this day razzes me because I kept falling asleep. I couldn't stay awake. She at least got 2 or 3 hours of sleep between going to sleep and her water breaking, but I didn't. I had been up since 6 a.m. the day before, and it was now 6 a.m. again, so 24 hours. I had barely eaten, and she kept wanting me to push on her back while she was
counteract the
contracting.
contraction.
So I got to the point where I had to figure out, because she would face me, so she was laying on her side facing me, but she did not want me behind her except for when I was pushing on her back. So every time she started to contract, I had to run around the bed to push on her back, but I was so tired I couldn't stay upright. And there was only one chair in the room, so I couldn't sit down on both sides. I was too tired to realize I could carry the chair around the table, or the bed. So I would push on her back, and then I would fall asleep while pushing on her back, like hanging off the bed, and then I would move back around. But literally, I don't know how either one of us survived. Yeah, she was so mad at me, and I'm like, I don't know what you want me to do. I don't have anything to drink. I can't. It's not like I'm falling asleep because I want to.
Well, you were drinking like a Coke or something.
Yeah, I kept asking them to bring me Coke, and I was eating like candy, trying to stay awake.
Oh, now I know why I threw up. So I had really bad heartburn, remember?
Oh, yeah.
And I kept asking
medicine.
for hot water, and then finally because I was on all my medication, so I don't know, I was paranoid because someone told me that I couldn't take like an antacid, but finally I was like, just give me something, because I literally felt like my throat was on fire, and they gave me something, and I think that made me throw up because it was really nasty. But yeah, our nurse probably thought we were crazy because he kept asking for a Coke and I kept asking for a hot water. But it was just because that was the only thing that like sort of soothed my heartburn.
And for the people out there who are going to say, why didn't you just ask for coffee? I've never had coffee in my life ever once. I don't know why, but I don't like coffee. I've never tried it. Just take my word for it. I don't like it.
But then they came in again, and I think at that point it was what, like noon or 2?
Yeah.
It was like noon, I think.
It was when you asked for it.
Yeah.
It was like 11 o'clock.
It was like 11 o'clock when they were like, we don't want you to not be strong enough to push, because obviously you need to have strength to push. They were like, you would probably benefit from, getting an epidural so that you can try to sleep and then, be strong to push. And so and I was like, okay, that's fine. But then it ended up and that's the annoying thing. Like I finally was like, okay, I give up, just give me the epidural. And it's like once you make that decision, then it's like every contraction you have until you get the epidural is like torture, because you're like, I shouldn't be having this contraction. I already decided I want the epidural. And then it took until I want to say it was 2. It was 2 p.m.
Yeah, it was a long time.
It was 2 p.m. when I finally got the epidural. And then when I got that, they couldn't get the Pitocin to work, so as soon as I got...
Well, they didn't know the Pitocin wasn't working.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest issue. They knew there was an issue with the Pitocin pump, but every time she reset it, she thought it was working. So it didn't work. Basically, like her contractions slowed
Yeah.
continuously until like 4:30 or 5 p.m.
Yeah.
And then they realized the Pitocin pump was not working properly.
Mm-hmm.
They increased or they fixed the pump, obviously increased the dose, and then it went pretty quick from there.
Well, I still pushed forever.
I mean, you still pushed forever, but
because
at that point it
the
was 5
contractions
p.m.
Remember, it was still slow during my contractions, because remember, I would push and then he would be sucked back
Well,
in.
I know that, but I mean, had they fixed the had the Pitocin pump been working all along, I think it would have been fine.
So basically, I got the epidural, and then, because before my contractions were super close, I mean, they were like every minute, if not quicker. And then I got the epidural, and it slowed way down, and then it was like 5-10 minutes between, like, it kind of, was a long gap. And then, I mean, basically, as soon as I got the epidural, they were like, oh, you're ready to push, which had we known I was ready to push, I probably just wouldn't have gotten the epidural, because at that point, like I said, it kind of screwed me over because it slowed everything down. And then, then I started pushing, and I pushed for 4 hours because it was spaced so far that they were like, oh, yay, the baby's coming. And then, 7 minutes later, the next contraction will come, so obviously the baby got sucked back in, and then it was just a big ordeal.
So then they finally started calling people. So at this point, our third nurse, we had the third nurse, we didn't mention her, but she was the best.
Yeah.
So the third nurse was now crossing her shift, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she decided to stay over because at this point she was like, oh my god, you've been here so long, I might as well see it through. So, speaking of which, I don't know if they can see my sock, but I'm pretty sure there's a hole in my sock, so don't judge me if you can see my holy sock. I really like these socks, they're very comfy. I'm not throwing them away quite yet. But so finally, somebody started, I think the nurse picked up the phone and called and was like, yeah, basically like, send a team in. I don't remember what she said, but like, that's how I remember it, send the team in. Like, it's going, we're ready. So, they started like coming in incrementally. There was like one person, and I don't know, again, I've never been in a delivery room before, so I don't know if this is normal, but they sent like one person in, this like girl's over at the computer, like typing a bunch of stuff away at the computer. And you're like, she didn't even introduce herself, and here she is over there naked from the waist down, obviously. And this lady's just typing away, having a good old time. Then somebody else walks in, and basically every time somebody new came in, they announced or questioned if there was a hemorrhage cart available, because Natalie was on all these blood thinners. So here she's trying to push, I'm falling asleep, she's falling asleep, and all we keep hearing is hemorrhage cart. And then the doctor arrives, and he just gowns up and stands across from her like we are across from the camera.
With his hands crossed.
I think his hands were behind his
back.
back.
Yeah, because he was sterile.
His hands were behind his back, and he's just standing there tapping his foot. And he's been there for, 10 minutes. He didn't even announce himself, I don't think. He's just standing there, right? Like, waiting for her to hike the baby to him. And again, nobody announces themselves. And then all of a sudden, it was like this mass panic. There's obviously all the trays and everything with all the apparatus. I don't know what the plural apparatus is, but... And, I mean, it was just really an odd situation. But at that point, it went pretty quick. Because I think when they came in, I think it was probably like 6:30ish or something, and he was born at 7:31. But in my head, and I think this is like everybody, obviously all you want to hear is the baby cry. But when he came out, he did cry like a little bit, but there was so much commotion. I don't know if you remember it differently.
I don't remember that. All I remember is. So I remember whenever I first started pushing, she asked if I wanted a mirror, and I was like, no, because I was worried it would like make me nauseous, like seeing blood or whatever, which I regret not doing that. Next time I would ask for a mirror. But I remember then whenever, I was really pushing and he was basically out, they were like, look down, and I remember looking down, and obviously he was crowning, but I remember looking down, and we knew we were going to have a small baby, but when he's crowning, you only see like a little bit of his head. And so I remember looking down, seeing just like, the little top of his head, and I was like, oh my gosh, he is little. And
I thought the same thing, because it was like maybe like the size of a fist.
Yeah, it was super tiny. And I was like, oh my gosh, he is tiny. And then he came out, and then, they brought him up, and then I don't really, I mean, obviously I know he cried, especially looking at the videos, but it doesn't really, I don't really remember.
'Cause-
There was just so much going on, and I think with everything that we've been there, just so many emotions, and then the only thing that I remember is I was holding him, and I think one of the first things I said to the nurse was, "Can I kiss him?" And she was like, "Yeah, it's your baby, like, do whatever you want to." And then I remember holding him, and they were, checking him out, and then, you went over because they were like taking measurements or whatever. And then I remember being like, why do I hurt? Because they didn't say anything that I tore, and they were just down there like stitching me up. And finally I was like, that hurts. And
the doctor's
like, oh, you can
pulling
feel this?
the thread like way up here and back in. It's like a 65-foot string.
And then he was like, oh, you can feel that? And I'm like, yeah, I can. He's like, oh. He's like, let me numb you up. But yeah, so that's the birth. And then...
So we have some videos, obviously from the birth, but being that it was kind of the beginning of COVID, we were kind of leery about taking videos, and also leery about, I mean, you walk into all the doctor's offices now and it says, no photos, no videos, and blah, blah, blah. So we were kind of like nervous about getting in trouble for doing anything really.
Yeah.
And I mean, at that point, I think we took a few.
Yeah.
So Natalie has a video put together. I don't know whether you'll like post it all or if you'll just put some clips up or something like that. But
to share that, and then and then maybe we'll have a video too talking about kind of like our stay at the hospital. I mean, obviously it's going to be different. Our experience was completely different than someone else who had a baby, not during the pandemic, or who's having it now, because obviously the protocols keep changing, and it's kind of.
But we definitely learned some things throughout. I don't think we talked about the lactation consultants or anything like that. So definitely that'll be. I think that was a good learning for us, and probably for other people, because we know people who've experienced it as well.
Yeah.
So obviously, I guess this wasn't intended to be educational in any way, shape, or form. Just an informal, long story. But I guess it was a long process. So, but if you do have any questions, if we would do anything different or anything, and obviously Natalie talks about a couple things that we would. But looking back on it, I guess that was a 29-hour. No.
22.
I can't even do the math.
I don't know.
Well, it was
my
12
water
to
broke
12.
At 11, 10.
It was too many hours.
I don't know.
We can't even add it. It was too many.
Time.
I don't have that many.
All I know is we arrived Thursday
at noon.
What?
Or I mean at midnight. And baby was born Friday at
night.
7 p.m.
It's a long time without food.
Yeah. So it wasn't that.
It was
14
hours.
No, it was 14 hours. See, we can't do the math. Midnight to 7 a.m.
Uh-huh.
Oh, and then 12 hours. There's 19 hours. 19 hours. 19 hours.
From when we arrived at the hospital,
Yeah.
My water broke.
Yeah, it was 19 and a half. But
yeah.
But anywho, sorry this was so long. This is like multiple videos probably. But anywho.
Thanks for watching.